Good evening. The television and radio stations of the United States and their affiliated stations are proud to provide facilities for a discussion of issues in the current political campaign by the two major candidates for the presidency. The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
Everyone is voting for Jack, 'cause he's got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track, 'cause he's got high hopes.
The year is 1960. It's been 15 years since the Second World War came to an end. America is experiencing one of the most prominent economic booms of its time. Children are being born at an exuberant rate, and the smell of politics is lingering within the air. Along with the peace came two presidents, Harry Truman, Vice President of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and best known for dealing with the immediate post-war aftermath, and also Dwight D. Eisenhower, former Supreme Allied Commander of Forces within Europe. Both presidents at the time showed immense strength with their choices, which was something that most Americans looked for in a leader. But when 1960 rolled around, and President Eisenhower's final term was coming to an end, the American public felt that they needed something new. The Eisenhower administration was considerably moderate when it came to domestic issues, pushing for the expansion of New Deal agencies and expanding Social Security. Eisenhower also supported the establishment of the interstate highway system and enjoyed relatively prosperous economic growth. But then, John Fitzgerald Kennedy came into the limelight. A young, handsome, charismatic character with a voracious attitude against our Cold War enemy, the Soviet Union. Kennedy announced his candidacy for office on January 2nd of 1960.
I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. The presidency is the most powerful office in the free world. Through its leadership can come a more vital life for all of our people. In it are centered the hopes of the globe around us for freedom and a more secure life.
And his charisma immediately gained him points in the race. He was also a veteran of the Second World War, which was a big plus with the public. He had commanded a series of PT boats in the Pacific Theater during the war, and unexpectedly became a war hero when his boat, PT-109, was destroyed by the Japanese destroyer Amagiri by crashing and splitting the boat in half. Kennedy gathered any surviving crew members and swam 3.5 miles to Plum Pudding Island, saving their lives, and afterwards swam almost an additional 5 miles to assist in locating food and supplies for his injured crew members. He even carved a distress message into a coconut so that when someone came along and found him, he was able to deliver said coconut to the American naval base. Reminds me a little bit of Castaway.
Well, we might just make it. Did that thought ever cross your brain?
These actions awarded Kennedy with the Purple Heart, the American Defense Service Medal, and the Asiatic Pacific Service Medal, and of course, the World War II Victory Medal. It wasn't just his accolades that set him apart from other candidates. He also grew up with extreme wealth. His father, Joe Kennedy Sr., had money and influence from his time in the stock market, and later as the first chair of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and also the former U.S. ambassador to Britain. So it is fair to say that the Kennedys grew up better than your average Americans. Jack, as he was affectionately named, grew up with 8 siblings in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was the second child of the family, with his brother Joe Jr. as the eldest in the family. Jack was far from perfect, though. He had multiple health issues ranging from severe back problems for almost his entire life, to the post-mortem reveal that he had been suffering from Addison's disease from around 1947 until his death. It's really hard to imagine that under that smile was a man in severe pain almost regularly. But no disease could discount the fact that the man had a certain quality about him that caught the public's attention, and that quality was put to use in the first ever broadcasted presidential debate in history. Before 1960, most people never really got to see the election process with their own eyes. The most common form of broadcast at the time was radio and, of course, the daily newspaper, so this brought a whole new element to the table. The campaign promises from both sides were pretty straightforward. Kennedy ran on the platform of getting America moving again, with the belief that the U.S. had fallen behind the USSR, both economically and militarily.
The reason Franklin Roosevelt was a good neighbor in Latin America was because he was a good neighbor in the United States. Because they felt that the American society was moving again. I want us to recapture that image. I want people in Latin America and Africa and Asia to start to look to America, to see how we're doing things, to wonder what the President of the United States is doing, and not to look at Khrushchev or look at the Chinese communists.
He also pushed for the establishment of NASA and promised that this new Democratic administration would appreciate the accomplishments made within this new frontier, the frontier of space. Nixon, on the other hand, ran on the platform that America was not standing still, and that, in fact, the Eisenhower administration had created more economic growth than the Truman administration before.
Is the United States standing still? Is it true that this administration, as Senator Kennedy has charged, has been an administration of retreat, of defeat, of stagnation? Is it true that, as far as this country is concerned, in the field of electric power, in all of the fields that he has mentioned, we have not been moving ahead? Well, we have a comparison that we can make. We have the record of the Truman administration of 7.5 years and the 7.5 years of the Eisenhower administration. When we compare these two records in the areas that Senator Kennedy has discussed tonight, I think we find that America has been moving ahead. Let's put it in terms that all of us can understand. We often hear gross national product discussed, and in that respect, may I say that when we compare the growth in this administration with that of the previous administration, that then there was a total growth of 11% over 7 years. In this administration, there's been a total growth of 19% over 7 years. That shows that there's been more growth in this administration than in its predecessor.
He also challenged the thought that Kennedy was experienced enough to deal in foreign affairs with the Cold War enemy. Even Truman had his doubts about his politically aligned friend's ability to handle such a volatile matter.
Are you certain that you are quite ready for the country, or the country is ready for you, in the role of president in January 1961? I have no doubt about the political heights to which you are destined to rise. But I'm deeply concerned and troubled about the situation we are up against in the world now and in the immediate future. That is why I hope that someone with the greatest possible maturity and experience would be available at this time. May I urge you to be patient. You will recall that I suggested to you at our meeting in Independence that all personal ambitions be put aside and that we all join forces to seek out such a man who could unite us in purpose and in action.
At the time, 43-year-old Kennedy would have been the second youngest person to hold the presidential office, right behind Theodore Roosevelt, who was 42 and unexpectedly thrown into the position after President William McKinley was assassinated. If you could summarize each candidate in a few words, Nixon would be normality, experience, and familiarity, while Kennedy would be more like new and young and just look at my face, I'm a pretty handsome dude. Also, he was a real big hit with the ladies.
His father had been a tremendous philanderer, womanizer, and it was part of what he simply needed to do, it seemed. He once said to the British Prime Minister, "If I don't have a woman every 3 days, I get a headache."
Both possible presidents had a good standing within their own political atmosphere, but they each were not without fault. One of Kennedy's biggest issues during the race was the Deep South's opinion of the young aristocrat. He countered this issue by nominating Lyndon B. Johnson as his running mate. Johnson was an experienced member of the Senate. He was also an important figure within Southern politics. With Johnson on the ticket, it was more likely that Kennedy would be able to carry the South in the election. Another issue was Kennedy's Catholic upbringing. Many Baptists and Lutherans found the aspect problematic, because within the Catholic doctrine, when it comes to a matter of church and state, the church must prevail. Kennedy attempted to tackle this issue by saying that,
I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president. who happens also to be a Catholic. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me.
Nixon's campaign was fraught with more exhaustion than public backlash. He pledged to campaign in all 50 states at the Republican National Convention.
And I announce to you tonight, and I pledge to you, that I personally will carry this campaign into every one of the 50 states of this nation between now and November the 8th.
And while on his journey through all 50 states, Nixon injured himself on a car door and had to cease campaigning and take antibiotics for 2 weeks before continuing on his tear through the U.S. While Nixon was recuperating from his injury, he had also lost a significant amount of weight, which made him appear frail and sick. This only dampened his chances for the presidency. And finally, on the night of September 26, 1960, the broadcast took place in Chicago, Illinois, and Kennedy played it cool as he possibly could, not overextending himself or appearing weak to the viewing audience. This had a profound effect on the American viewers. They saw the young, intelligent, charismatic, potential leader and saw the possibilities from the ideals that he spoke of. Nixon, all the while, appeared sick. He was still short a few pounds from his stay in the hospital. Even his mother called after the debate to check on her son's well-being. He appeared unsure, his eyes wandered across the debate hall, and sweat could be visible throughout the entire debate. In total, there were about 70 million people who viewed the first debate, and many personally believed that Kennedy had shown himself to be a powerful force within the political domain. Some people say that Kennedy won on TV and Nixon won on radio. While this is still up for debate, it surely was a quality that helped propel the young politician one step closer to the White House. So, what happens from here? Well, after the first debate, 3 more were held, and Nixon, over time, began to appear more physically apt for the position. But unfortunately, the people had made their decision. John F. Kennedy became the president-elect on the night of November 8th, 1960. And don't feel too bad for Nixon, because he makes a comeback. A very surprising comeback. The choices made during Kennedy's campaign proved to be fruitful ones. With his campaign in swing states, he obtained 303 electoral votes, 49.72% of the popular vote, while Nixon received 219 electoral votes and 49.55% of the popular vote. The election ended up being extremely close, but what blossomed was the idea of a Camelot presidency. This term Camelot came from the former wife of JFK, Jacqueline Kennedy, when she was looking back on the presidency as something that could never be achieved again. Kennedy's term was far from perfect, but it was the ideal image of what a president should look like. It also, unfortunately, came to an abrupt halt when the young president was assassinated on November 22, 1963. In my opinion, I started to view Kennedy as a transitional president from the old traditional ways of politics into the new charismatic statesmanship that has sometimes become the dominating factor in the future elections of American politics. I also believe it was a moment where the American dream became a little more gruesome. It was a tragedy that the American public will never forget, and unfortunately, it was not the last tragedy of the 1960s. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Now, I guess this is the part where I introduce myself. I am Antonio, and this is History in Pieces. Like it or hate it, this channel is going to be about history. And when I say history, I mean all history. I range from topics on politics, war, law, film, and even the weather, because that stuff can be pretty intense. But I digress. I want to thank all of you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please stick around, because there's many more to come. This next video, though, I'll be picking something a little more brighter. So please, stick around, and I will speak to you all soon.